Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games. Today we have another top 10 list for you all. Today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 Marvel themed board games. If you've been following the channel or if you checked out my recent top 100 board games of all times list, you might have noticed that I'm a big Marvel fan. Theming is very important for me in gaming, not necessarily its integration with the mechanisms of the game, as many people refer to as theming, but just the intellectual property that's behind a given game adds something to the ambiance and to the enjoyment factor, at least as far as I'm concerned. And by far, my favorite intellectual property has to be the Marvel Universe, whether it's the Marvel Cinematic Universe or the comics or the animated series. I just really gravitate towards that universe and towards the characters in that universe. As you can see by my backdrop here, I am really invested in this theme and in these type of games. So without any further ado, let's get straight to the list where I'll be talking about my 10 favorite board games with the Marvel theme. My number 10 Marvel themed board game of all time is Marvel Zombies. And this is a spin-off or re-implementation of the Zombicide game, in particular Zombicide Black Plague from Cool Mini or Not CMON Games. And this had a major Kickstarter. I did not back the Kickstarter, although I did find some online stores where I was able to get some of the boxes from the Kickstarter, not to mention the mass market production, which is the Heroes Resistance box. They recently, about a year ago, came out with a DC themed or deceased theme Kickstarter. I'm not as interested in that because while I do like DC, I do not like it as much, nearly as much as I do like Marvel. And this is based on the Marvel Zombies comic books. Basically, you have these different scenarios. In some of them, the players are playing the heroes, the still human heroes, who are having to deal with this wave of zombies, including some special supers, some super-powered characters that have been zombified as well. There's another alternate scenario or way of playing, a mode of playing, where you will control the heroes who are already zombified, going up against the regular, still human superheroes. But it's a fun game. I like Zombicide Black Plague. I will say that this has completely replaced the game for me, as a Marvel-themed re-implementation tends to do with me. But this is just a fun, simplistic game, beer and pretzels type of game, not lots of thought involved in it. There is some strategy. This is a scenario-based game. It's a cooperative game where 4 or more players are going to be controlling the team of characters. Well, let me not say necessarily 4 or more players. There will be 4 or more characters, because you can play this game solo or with fewer than 4 players, but you have to account for the fact that each scenario has a specific amount of superheroes that are required for it, usually ranging from 4 to 6. And if you do not have that many players, then someone's going to have to double dip, or the players collectively are going to have to control the other characters, because there might be more characters than there are players. But it's really cool because each character has specific abilities attributed to it. As you're defeating the different zombies, you're gaining XP. And that XP will eventually level up your characters. And as you level up, you'll gain additional actions, more powerful actions that you can trigger later on in the game. I think this game does have the potential of climbing on my rankings as I play and open up new expansions or additional expansions that I have not gotten to yet. My number 10 board game, or Marvel-themed board game of all time, Marvel Zombies. And now we move on to my number 9, and that is Marvel Remix. Very much the opposite from Marvel Zombies. Marvel Zombies is this grandiose big box game with lots of plastic, lots of miniatures. This game here is a small box. It's a card-based game where that's all you're doing. Marvel Zombies is a cooperative game. This is a fully competitive game for up from 2 to 5 players can play it. And basically, players start the game with 7 cards in their hand. Each turn, they are drawing 1 card from one of the respective decks or from the revealed public area discard pile that, or not discard pile, but discard area that all players can draft from as well. And then you are discarding one of the cards from your hand. So you have to get rid of one. You start your turn with 7 cards. You finish your turn with 7 cards. You start the game with 7 cards. You finish the game with 7 cards. And after a certain amount of cards are discarded, this kind of serves as the ticking time bomb or the time time track for the game. After that's done, the game's over and players are going to reveal their cards and they're going to score points. And basically these cards combine with one another. They have different card types that are benefited from other card types. They have different symbols or icons on the cards that will reward other cards based on their specifications. And that's something that you're factoring in as you're drafting the cards. You're looking at what you currently have. You know that you don't have an indefinite amount of time. It's a pretty short game, usually ranging from 15 to 25 minutes. So you know that you got to work quickly with what you got. And maybe you're going to draft 3, 4, maybe 5 cards throughout the course of the game. So you got to be as efficient as possible. You need to have at least one hero or ally among those 7 cards of the different card types. These 2 are mandatory, or one of the 2 are mandatory, and then you have to have one villain. There's no negotiation as far as that. If you do not have at least one hero or ally, and if you do not have a villain at the end of the game, you don't even factor in, you're not even eligible for victory. Really cool game with lots of neat combos, simple to learn the rules, but at the same time, complicated to master and perfect your strategy. My number 9 Marvel themed game of all time, Marvel Remix. Now we move on to my number 8 Marvel themed game, and that is Marvel Superheroes. And this is a pioneer of sorts in the modern board game hobby as far as taking this popular superhero Marvel themed intellectual property and applying it to a game that is actually functional, that is actually appealing, and not just a mass market reskinning of some other type of game like Scrabble or Monopoly or Sorry. This game here was published in the mid-2000s, I think it was around 2006, and the group of designers that designed this game are the same team that made War of the Ring, a very popular and established game in the board game hobby. They were not nearly as successful with this game that they published. As a matter of fact, it didn't last in print very long, and it never has been reprinted since. And while I do see the flaws of the game, I do enjoy it because it has nice pre-painted miniatures. I am not a good painter, so I do not have to worry about painting, unlike games like Marvel Zombies, where they all stay in their shades of gray and shades of blue, because I'm not touching a paintbrush. I'm just not good at it. I've tried it 5 years ago, and it was an epic fail. But this game here comes with pre-painted miniatures, not the same type of quality of miniatures that you get nowadays in the 2020s, but pretty solid. The game consists of a map of Manhattan and the outskirts of Brooklyn and Queens. I was born and raised in New York, so I have a certain affinity, a certain special place in my heart for this location. I love boards that consist of maps of real world locations. Each of the boroughs are divided into different districts. Each of these different districts have different challenges that players or the different players around the table, the superheroes, are trying to troubleshoot. They're trying to put out these fires. But this is not a cooperative game. This is a game for 2 to 4 players, and each player represents one particular team. There are 4 superhero teams. You got X-Men, you got Avengers, you have Fantastic Four, and you have Marvel Knights, so among the most popular teams in the Marvel universe. And each team has 4 different characters from that team, and each character has their own particular stats. They have their own particular hit points. They have their own particular actions that they will trigger based on the dice roll. A lot of this game is dice rolling and combat, and when you resolve combat, you are competing, the active player is competing with the next player. The next player is basically controlling the villains. So the villains are not the individual players do not represent the villains. Each player is a superhero team, but the next player in clockwise order will be rolling the dice and making the decisions for the villain during your current turn. And it's a really cool game because it's just a VP. Whoever gets to a certain amount of victory points, or whoever gets the most victory points after a certain amount of rounds, is the winner of the game. So who was the best superhero team that defeated the most bad guys is basically how I would sum it up. Really cool. I like the asymmetry from the different teams and the different characters within those teams. My number 8 Marvel themed board game of all time, Marvel Superheroes. Now we move on to my number 7. And that's Marvel Dice Throne. And Dice Throne was already an established game with multiple seasons of Kickstarter projects before they dabbled into the Marvel universe. And at this point, they have multiple seasons of Marvel content as well. I have only played the first season content and only the base game within it, which is basically Avenger-themed characters. You got characters like Thor and Scarlet Witch. You have Loki, who I guess is kind of working as an anti-hero or superhero in this version. And all the players, this is not a cooperative game, just like the last few games I mentioned. This is actually a competitive game where basically players are all combating, they're fighting one another. You could play 2 players, you could play 3 players, you could play 4 players, I believe 2v2, but basically every player has a certain amount of hit points. In a 3-player game, it's 35 hit points, and you're basically going to be choosing who you attack, who you fight. Every character has their own special player board. This is a dice rolling game, but it has a lot of important card play. So you're rolling the dice, and these are going to trigger the different actions on your individual player board, different attacks, sometimes different defenses. Some attacks can be defended, some attacks can be prevented, other attacks cannot be changed, altered, or modified at all. And basically, you're rolling the dice, and after 2 additional rolls, up to 2 additional rolls, this is basically Yahtzee-style dice rolling, you can settle on a choice based on your different actions. Every player board has 8 individual actions, and every player feels different from one another based on their own thematic strengths that are unique to that character within the Marvel Universe. And every turn, you're going to be able to do something interesting, because no matter how bad your dice rolling is, there's going to be a power that's going to be able to be triggered based on the different icons that are there. And ultimately, every character has this ultimate ability, which is like the unstoppable one. Nobody could prevent it, and it deals a ton of damage and really can annihilate a character. But it is so much fun. I think the subsequent seasons introduce cooperative play, scenario-based play. For now, I'm only in season 1, but I am enjoying it. I'm enjoying the card play where you place cards, in particular the cards that upgrade your player board so that actions that you take in the future are upgraded versions of the previous actions you were taking. Really cool game. My number 7 board game with a Marvel theme, and that's Marvel Dice Throne. Now we move on to my number 6 Marvel themed board game, and that is Villainous. So Marvel Villainous is a reimplementation of Disney Villainous. I believe there's also a Star Wars Villainous as well. And each of these are different games, self-contained games with expansions within their respective universes. And from what I understand, these are not compatible with one another. There are enough differences and nuances in the rules that you cannot mix and match. But you don't need to, because each individual universe has a good amount of content, a good amount of expansion content out already for it. And I gravitate towards Marvel, even though I've heard that the Disney iteration of Villainous is the more polished one, or the more well-respected one. It's higher ranked on BGG. At the same time, I gravitate more towards the Marvel theme. And basically in Villainous, all the players are competing, yet another competitive game, where all the players are villains, not superheroes. So that's the twist of this game. Quite often in all these games that I'm going to mention, you either represent an individual hero, or you represent a team or a group of superheroes. In this case, you are just one villain. And this game is the most asymmetric game of the 10 games on this list. So if you like asymmetric games, that is something to factor in. In this game, each individual villain will have their own player deck, unique to them. But beyond that, each individual player, according to their villain, is going to have a unique and distinct victory condition. So not everybody's trying to do the same thing. You are looking around the table, making sure that your opponents are not closer to their victory condition than you are. But I feel like that keeps you very immersed in the game experience. You cannot just go on autopilot looking at a score track and seeing who's the highest. No, you have to actually pay attention to what your opponents are doing, remember what their victory condition is, and assess how far they are from actually accomplishing it. Are they closer to their goal than you are to yours? And it's so cool because we have this fate deck, which basically represents a neutral deck that all the players can occasionally trigger actions to draw from. And when you draw from the fate deck, more often than not, it's some type of superhero from the Marvel Universe. You can place it on a player's board, one of your opponent's board, and that hero will be messing with them. That hero will limit the actions on their board because every player has their own individual player board, and from turn to turn, the decision you're making is you have to move your piece to a new spot on your player board, and each spot on the player board triggers a certain amount of actions, different actions from one another, and you can never go to the same place 2 turns in a row. So you have to factor that all in. You place a hero on an optimal location or spot on a player's player board, and you will really hinder them, and they'll have to concentrate their efforts on defeating that hero and getting rid of that hero so that they could free up that space again for the actions that they so desire. Really cool game. My number 6 Marvel themed board game of all time, Marvel Villainous. And now we move on to my number 5 Marvel themed board game, and that is Hail Hydra. And Hail Hydra is technically a party style game. This is a big group game for at least 5 players. I think you could play up to 8. And basically all the players represent different superheroes. At the beginning of the game, you're all going to draft a superhero with a particular special power that can only be triggered one time throughout the game, more often than not. So you really want to time when you execute that action very well. But all the players are shield agents, or at least supposedly they are, because 2, 3, or even 4 of these players, depending on the player count, will actually be secret infiltrators from Hydra who are trying to take over shield from within. And every round, basically, players are going on different missions, which basically consists of fighting these different villains. There's lots of super villains, a stack of super villains that you're going throughout the course of the game, and they're trying to attack New York, and you're basically trying to protect New York by defeating these super villains. And it's basically a mission, and you're playing cards trying to contribute to the defeat of that villain. Here's the thing, the Hydra agents, they're not going to want for that mission to succeed. So they're going to play cards down, secretly so, that are going to actually hinder and stop players from being able to accomplish their missions. But they also want to go under the radar. Like all of these secret trader, hidden role type of games, your poker face, your body language, your ability to keep a straight face and not reveal who you are is very important. But also timing all the decisions you make as far as contributing towards the missions, when you allow a mission to succeed, when you commit towards a mission failing, and also when do you pull the trigger on saying Hail Hydra. Yes, in this game you could actually say the words Hail Hydra, and there will be some consequences to the heroes the moment you do so. However, you want to find the opportune time to say that, because if you say it too early or if you say it too late, you won't get the maximum benefit from it. So keep that in mind. Just really cool game, asymmetric as far as the different abilities that the different heroes do. I love these type of games with a hidden trader. My number 5 Marvel themed board game of all time, Hail Hydra. Now we move on to my number 4, and this is where we get to the part of my list of games that I really, really enjoy. Not to say that I don't like numbers 5 through 10, but these are games that I could play repeatedly from day to day because of how much I enjoy them. My number 4 is Versus System, in particular, the Marvel Battles. And Versus System is a 2-player, or sometimes it could play up to 4 players, competitive card game, very much in the spirit of games like Magic the Gathering, where there's a tactical element and you're rotating cards 90 degrees in order to indicate that you are activating them to make attacks. And there are so many intellectual properties that Upper Deck has invested in for this product, for this line of games. They have Alien, they have Buffy the Vampire Slayer, they have Mortal Kombat, they have wrestling. But by far, the content or the universe that they most have invested in for this game is Marvel. And I'm so happy about that. They have so many expansions covering all possible corners of the Marvel universe. In this game, each player is basically one individual character. However, his or her deck consists of the different possible allies that that character would have based on their team faction, whether that be Fantastic Four or X-Men or Avengers or what have you. And you're trying to build the right deck, because you have to have an exactly 60 card deck. 60 card is not the limit, 60 card is not the minimum, it's the exact amount. And you have to factor in which allies complement your character best. Also, there are other types of cards like events and locations which will trigger special abilities. You also have to find the right composition of that based on your characters and what icons trigger their special abilities. There are special superpowered abilities that each of the heroes have, and they are triggered by particular color-coded icons that you're going to want to make sure you include in your deck. So once you decide what hero you're playing, which allies you're including, the rest of the deck building strategizing is figuring out these different locations and event cards that are going to complement the rest of it very well. And basically, you are that main character, and you're trying to defend and protect this character with your allies and outlast your opponents and eliminate their main characters first. Because once your main character has sustained a certain amount of hit points according to their health, you are eliminated from the game. But it's just so cool building the deck, playing the deck. I love the fact that when you get attacked, when you have multi-health characters, because some of your characters have 1 hit point, the moment they sustain any damage, they're gone, they go to your discard pile. But you have other characters, including your main character, who have 2, 3, 4, or even 5 or 6 hit points if they're your main characters at least. And when you get attacked by another player, those cards go face down. So when you're playing a multiplayer game, the rest of the players, all of your opponents, cannot choose to just pick on you and bully you, because you're going to put those cards face down and they will not be available for other players to attack. So they're going to have to choose another face up card in order to attack. And it makes you spread the love, so to speak, and keeps the game very balanced. My number 4 Marvel themed board game of all time, Versus System. And now we move on to my number 3 Marvel themed game. And many of you probably thought it might have been number 1 based on my backdrop here, but it's actually not. It's number 3, and that's Marvel United. And this game here is such a fun game. I own tons of content. I've only played through season 1, but I own season 2. I own season 3. It's just so much material to get through. I love playing this with my children. This game is simple enough that my 9-year-old boy could play and help me with the strategy. My 6.5-year-old girl can play, not so much helping with the strategy. You kind of have to guide her along. But the point is, it's simple enough that a child can play. However, don't take for granted the strategy in this game, because you have your different scenarios based on different villains, and there's so much content, so many villains, so many superhero combinations. And the villains each have their own different nuances as to how they might win the game. There are standard generic ways of winning the game, like running through the decks and such. However, there's also villain specific victory conditions quite often, and you got to factor those in, and how the villain attacks you and how the villain hurts you. And the villains have different overflow effects. If you let a particular location get too crowded with thugs and civilians, there will be overflow effects, and those will be consequences and casualties that you rather not have to deal with. And you're trying to put out the fires and take care of the thugs and take care of the civilians, because not only are those the missions that you need to accomplish in order to even be able to attack the villain. You cannot attack the villain until you've taken care of a certain amount of thugs and a certain amount of civilians. But you also want to keep those thugs and civilians at bay, because you want to avoid those dreaded overflow effects. And there are so many different characters and the way they combine with one another. The name of the game says it all. It's Marvel United. This is a cooperative game, and it's very heavy on the team aspect of it, because when you play a card on the bottom of your card, and each different hero has their own unique set of 10 cards, where the configuration of all the different possible symbols is going to differ from one character to another. Also, each hero is going to have anywhere from 3 to maybe 4 or 5 signature cards that are absolutely unique to them. But when you play a card, at the bottom of the card, more often than not, it has 1 or 2 icons based on the different actions that you do in this game. You have your movement icon, you have your attack icon, and you have your heroics icon, which helps you rescue civilians, and it also helps you defeat particular threat cards around the board. But these 3 icons are the bread and butter of the game. And the opponent that comes after you, when they play their card, not only will they be able to trigger the icons on the bottom of their card, but they're also going to be able to piggyback off the icons on your card, or the player who came before them in the turn order. So that's something to factor in as you decide the seating order, the seating arrangement. You're going to factor in who has certain weaknesses that you know of, that you might want to rearrange the seating order in order to cover those weaknesses. Also, as you're playing your card, as you're making your decision, you want to set up your teammate who goes after you to have as optimal a turn as possible. Really cool from a strategic perspective. At the same time, so gateway friendly, so easy to learn. My number 3 Marvel themed board game of all time, Marvel United. Now we move on to my number 2 Marvel themed game, and for many years it was my number 1 until I started playing a little bit more Marvel themed games. And this game is very responsible, very much contributed to my love for the hobby overall, and in particular, the deck building genre. And that is Marvel Legendary. And this game here, I've been playing it for so many years. I have so much content for it. It looks like they're still not done. They're coming out with a second edition to the core box. Every year they have multiple expansions announced and released. And basically, this is a cooperative game. So just like Marvel United, I guess the cooperative games rose to the top on this list. Every player is working together. You're not necessarily a character in this game as you are in Marvel United. It's more like you are a SHIELD employee or something like that. And you're recruiting the different heroes that are represented by the cards in the market of cards that you're acquiring throughout the course of the game. It's called the headquarters in this game. And basically, you're trying to build your deck up as is typical with all other deck building games. You start with a very generic, bland, weak deck, and you're acquiring different cards that are going to strengthen it. And basically, you're trying to overcome the particular villain or the mastermind, as it's called in this game. And once you defeat him a certain amount of times, you have won the game. There's also a scheme, which basically, to me, is the heart of the game, because the scheme, it's almost like a narrative. It's very thematic to a particular comic book storyline. And basically, it changes and tweaks some of the rules of the game, usually to the disadvantage of the players, and it quite often adds an additional winning condition for the villain. So it's something to look out for. What do I have to do beyond just defeating the mastermind a certain amount of times? What are these triggers that I need to look out for and try to prevent at all costs, so that in my efforts of defeating the villain, they do not accomplish their goal and I do not lose the game, or we do not lose the game if you're playing cooperatively. You could play solo this game as well. I do play solo. It's just enjoyable. The combination of the different villain groups, the masterminds, the schemes, and the particular lineup of heroes from game to game is going to vary so much. The permutations are infinite. Just so much variability, and I really love and enjoy variability in a game. My number 2 Marvel-themed board game of all time, Marvel Legendary. And now we move on to my number 1, the top game on this list, and that is Marvel Champions. And I am a big fan, not only of the Marvel theme, not only of card-based games and tactical style card games, but I am a big fan of the living card model that is exemplified in Fantasy Flight's catalog. And I have not played one of their LCGs that I have not enjoyed greatly, but this is perhaps my favorite, and it's definitely my favorite Marvel-themed game out there. I just love the idea of being an individual hero, and even more so than Marvel United, even more so than games like Marvel Zombies or Marvel Dice Throne, where in these particular games, or Marvel Versus System, in each of these particular games, you are an individual hero. But in none of these games do you feel it more than in Marvel Champions. First of all, the heart of the game is managing your core card, or your most important card, which is your identity card. And this is a two-sided card that on one side, it shows your hero identity. This is the character in their superhero form. On the other side of the card, you have your alter ego identity. This is their secret identity. This is who they are when they're living their personal life, when they're not fighting crime. And throughout the course of the game, you're flipping back and forth from these two identities, which is so thematic, because the superheroes, quite often, who they are in their alter ego fashions is just as important to the story as who they are in superhero form. And you're switching back because sometimes you've sustained too much damage. You want to go back to alter ego. Here's the thing. When you're alter ego, you're living your personal life, you're healing, you're licking your wounds, but now there's no superhero, or there's fewer superheroes to contend with the main villain, and now they're going to be able to advance their plots. And that's the tension that you're fighting and you're wrestling with throughout the course of the game. When do I turn to alter ego? When do I go back to superhero form? Because you have a certain amount of hit points. And if you lose those hit points, you are eliminated from the game. If you're eliminated, the players have not lost, but I will tell you this, it's going to be very unlikely for them to win, especially if it's too early on that you've been eliminated. If you're in a solo game, then you have lost. So you got to manage these decisions well. Each superhero has a toolkit of 15 cards that are required to be part of their deck. And these cards in their toolkit are all so thematic, and they all feel so appropriate for the individual characters that they represent. I feel like they have hit a home run with every character I have encountered from a thematic perspective. There are some characters that you play and you wish were a little bit more successful at winning, but again, thematically speaking, their decks quite often make sense. And after you have these 15 cards, you gotta recruit or acquire different cards for your deck building from these different. You have a generic basic type of card, which you can always pick from, but you also have to select an aspect, and your aspect is basically going to be your specialty. Is your specialty going to be thwarting the supervillain and their schemes? Is your specialty going to be being an aggressor or being attack oriented? Is your specialty going to be protecting yourself and healing you and your teammates? What's your specialty going to be? You're going to choose this aspect, and then you're going to build the rest of your deck to a minimum of 40 and to a maximum of 50. And then you're going to go out and you're going to fight these bad guys. And there's so many scenarios in this game, so many expansions, so many possible heroes. And it doesn't look like Fantasy Flight's even near being done with this gaming system. And I am so excited about that. My number one Marvel themed board game of all time, Marvel Champions. And that's it for today's list, folks. Thank you so much for joining us here at When Harry Met Board Games. Please comment down below. Tell me what you think about this list. What Marvel themed game do you like that did not make it to this list? Who's your favorite Marvel character? I'm interested in reading what you guys have to say. This is Harry saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.